Welcome to Watchman Privacy. This is Gabriel Custodiet. I have no sponsors and don't want sponsors. I'm not part of a company. I'm not trying to build an audience by compromising my message and appealing to the masses. I only shill for the truth and privacy as I see them. How many of the people you listen to can say that? To support this rare and truly independent show, you can donate Monero or Bitcoin, purchase one of my books, engage in consulting with me and my colleague Urban Hacker, or buy my course, Escape the Technocracy, to start your privacy and freedom journey in the most powerful way you can. Find everything at watchmanprivacy.com. Welcome to Watchman Privacy. I'm very pleased to be joined by Jayant Bhandari. This is his fifth appearance on the show. And Jayant is a very interesting person, as I'm sure those of you who have listened before are aware. He is, as his day job, financial analyst, investor, and he also runs a seminar called Capitalism and Morality, kind of a free speech seminar platform in Canada. And of course, we all know him as a powerful alternative cultural observer, shall we say. He's traveled extensively around the world. He's lived in a lot of third world countries. He has a lot of incisive criticisms of the third world. And Jayant, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you very much for having me again, Gabriel. I'm very well. How are you?
Well, I'm doing great. Every opportunity I get to talk to you is fantastic. And I know a lot of people are really interested in the conversations that you and I do. And so let's just get into it. I just want to say, for people who are wondering, why are you bringing Jayant Bhandari onto your show? First of all, because I want to, period. But also, I love how he has opened my mind and a lot of people's minds to the fact that the problems we face are not necessarily governmental. They're not necessarily economical. They're not necessarily technological, but they are cultural. And that all of these other problems I just mentioned are secondary to culture. And he also resonated very much with my own experience growing up in the third world. And the ideas, the way he's unpacked his ideas have really resonated with me, like very few ideas ever have. I wanted to start with this, Jayant, talking about the third world. And there are a lot of libertarians out there who I find, when they start to analyze the world and they look into the third world, and what they tend to say is, look at all these third world countries. They have large governments. The governments are tyrannical. They need more free markets. They need a smaller government. And I'm just wondering, when libertarians say that, do you think that they are being politically correct?
They might not be politically correct, Gabriel. They just don't know the deeper factors underpinning those bigger governments, those tyrannical governments. They don't understand why free market does not exist in those third world countries. And the reason is very simple. The reason is cultural. The reason is to do with the people of the third world. They provide nutritions for tyrannical psychopaths to rise into places of power. And that is very easy to understand, because the moment the Europeans left their colonies, the third world countries rapidly started turning into tyrannies. I think the only exception from all those tens and tens of countries was Singapore. Apart from that, every other country became a tyranny almost right away. And then, so tyranny is a product of the culture of these people. If you remove tyranny from these people, they will start to have an existential crisis. Now, this is very hard to understand for people who have a libertarian mindset, because they want to believe that every person looks for liberty. I look for liberty, Gabriel. I crave for it. But there are many, many people who crave for a nanny state, who want to be oppressed, who want to be told what to do. And they will automatically create a tyrannical system. And everything else is an outcome, is a secondary effect of that.
Now, just as to incorporate a little bit of critique, as I like to do early in our interviews, one of the biggest pushbacks that I get from people who have listened to you or some of our conversations goes something like this. And they say, they have great interactions with people of the third world. Maybe they've stayed with an African family for a month and they find them generous and kind and selfless. Or they find their exchange family in South America to be the same. And not everybody has kind of the observations that you have looking into the third world. They don't notice things like the lying, the being stressed, the fractured families that you've described in some of your own journeys. And this is why I think your ideas don't penetrate with some of the audience, or if they do, some of the I've heard people say, well, they think what you're saying is true, but every time the individual third world people that they think of are the exception. What do you think is going on? Are these people missing something? Or
Gabriel, a white person has a very tough time understanding the third world people because when he goes to the third world, he is seen as a god. He's treated as a very special person. And these people, the people of the third world, go through a phase of catharsis. They want to look the best in front of the white guy because this is a god from their point of view standing in front of them. And also is something very exotic, very new for them. Their lives are extremely boring and wretched. So a white guy provides them a change of view, and he's a god standing in front of them. These poor people are also very amused when they look at the white guy because the white guy spends in a day what this poor guy makes in a year. So he's also very amused. He really, really thinks that this white guy must be God. So firstly, Gabriel, I used to be a lot into New Age literature at one point of time. Some of that was very good, like Scott Peck. I think we talked about his books in the past. I loved his books growing up. Wayne Dyer was great. Stephen Covey was great. But I also read a whole range of New Age books. And these people, some of the New Age people who I no longer like so much, like Deepak Chopra, for example. These are the people who would go to India and run meditations things, or a white guy would go to a village and work there. And because the way people were responding, they thought that people of the third world were happy even in their poverty. Now, that is completely erroneous. These are extremely stressed people. They are very unhappy people. They're very oppressed people. And they, of course, create their own oppression and their own stress. But this is what their existence is. But just because they are happy when they are facing you does not mean that they are happy in general. So that's one thing. That one thing is about catharsis. The other thing is about what you said, that some of these people are very intelligent. Some of these people are very compassionate. And that is indeed true, Gabriel. But that is where people's lack of understanding of statistics comes into play. You are looking at the tail end of the bell curve and trying to imagine that to be the bell curve, trying to imagine that to be the normal. Now, Gabriel, I have met some of the people I have met from the third world are among the best people I have ever met in my life, because they have experienced every sides of life. Some of the women I have met from the third world are extremely good because they have not only experienced the third world culture, the first world culture, but also what it means to be a woman. So if you enlighten yourself from that situation, yes, you can be very, very good. But that does not mean it reflects, it's the same with the other people in the third world country. Virtually everyone in the third world, Gabriel, and this is astounding, is after tyrannical rulers. They are after resource acquisition. They don't care whether you die for their one penny benefit. They have no compassion. I did not know the word compassion, the real meaning of the word compassion, until I arrived in the United Kingdom. So these, you have to be really careful before you judge them too differently. Because again, Gabriel, there's another third point, that we usually get tired of the surroundings that we grow up in. And the Christian surroundings provide you strong fences sometimes, and you just want to loosen up. And when you go to a third world country, you find this sense of loosening up. You might find this catharsis within yourself as well. So a combination of all these things might make you think that the third world is good, but you have to normalize your understanding, which is that you should live like a poor guy in a third world, work there, engage with those people on a day-to-day basis, and then start to understand what they really are like.
Just sticking with an overview of big third world questions, a statistic that I saw a couple of years ago that amazed me was the fact that 1/8 of the world's population lived in the biggest 33 cities on the planet. There are a lot of megacities that have cropped up and built up over the years. A surprising proportion of these is to be found in the third world, whether that's Cairo or Lagos is one I have in mind, which is projected to have something like 250 million people in the upcoming, I think, 2 decades, which is astonishing. What is going on? You're a great person to ask this question. What is going on with these massive mega cities in the third world that just seem to attract everybody?
Gabriel, when Europeans started colonizing the world and when they concocted this concept of urbanization, this was to bring in people together to work together for higher productivity. That was one of the key components of industrial revolution as well. Urbanization also bring in the smartest people of your society to be close to each other, where they could sit in coffee shops, for example, and discuss what to do next for their society. So urbanization is a concept that actually brings in people together to increase their productivities. And that's what you see, let's say, in New York or the San Francisco or London or Paris or Zurich. These are great centers. And that's what you see in Tokyo, in Seoul. These are great centers. They attract the very best of their people to bring them together and work them together in sync with each other so that they could lead to higher productivity, not just in financial terms, but in philosophical terms as well. Now, something else happened in the third world countries. So that is how it all started. That's how Calcutta started, for example. That's how Madras, which is now known as Chennai, started. The British brought in some of the best people to live and work together in Calcutta and Madras. And, if you might know of a Nobel laureate, Rabindranath Tagore, for example, who was in Calcutta. And there was what is called Bengal Renaissance that is started in Calcutta because you brought in the best minds of the countries to live in those urban areas. But once the British left the third world countries, something else started happening. The very best people, of course, stayed on in the urban areas, but these cities turned into slum areas. You go to any third world country, and the big cities are nothing but slum areas. Rule of thumb is that 50% of all the urban centers in India are slums. The remaining 50%, in my view, are officially, of course, not slums, but in my view, they are still slums. So they are really slums for all intents and purposes. So what happened once the British left these urban centers was that the British way of thinking, which was philosophical and to increase productivity, went with them. And the concept of urbanization was upended. It was hollowed out by the natives. What happened with the urbanization? They became centers of crime, and also because if you wanted any facility, it was only available in urban areas. If you wanted any kind of medical care, if you wanted electricity, if you wanted water, you had to move to the slum areas of the third world cities to benefit from those. So at the end of the day, New Delhi or Mumbai or Bangalore don't really provide you the kind of productivity that was imagined by Europeans when they started thinking of urbanization. What has happened in these cities is massive slum situation where the powerful people live and who ensure that they are safe, who have electricity and water. And that also attracts a whole bunch of people who are there just because they want to access those facilities. So again, urbanization in the third world is very, very different from urbanization in the first world. But then you don't have to take my word for it. Urbanization in the first world has started changing as you get increasingly more and more people from the third world moving into the first world. The people of the third world, when they immigrate to the first world, they don't bring themselves together as cogs working in a machine for higher production of the society. What you have is employees who look for jobs with Tim Hortons because that's really the easiest kind of things they can seek out, and they stay there. But they don't really add to the urbanization the way urbanization was originally conceived, which was to lead to higher productivity in financial and philosophical affairs.
I would gather that most people in the first world can't really picture what happens in a sweatshop. This is just a term that people hear every now and then, makes them think for a few seconds, and then they go about their day.
Sweatshops are great. They are a massive improvement on the living conditions of the third world people. In fact, Gabriel, I can't even imagine how the third world people can ever get out of the sweatshop situation. The best they probably can ever get is the sweatshop situation. What you have in, let's say, in Bangladesh is Bangladesh is picking up a lot of sweatshop work from China these days, and that is great for them. I say that not because I want people to live in sweatshops, but that is what all that works for them. That is the limit of their productivity. If you don't provide sweatshops, which these days might even be air conditioned and might be crampy, might have too many people, you do monotonous work. But look at it from the perspective of what happens in the third world if you don't have sweatshops. You have slave labor. I have seen slave labor in my life. There are more slave labor in India than any other country on the planet. These people are made to work 18 hours a day. They don't get any vacation. They don't get any medical facility. They're fully slaves. In fact, Gabriel, just digressing a bit, yesterday, a court in Switzerland gave 4-year sentences to one of the richest families in the world, and these are Indians. They live in Geneva. They have a mansion there, but they were paying about $10 or $7 a day to their people who they brought in from India, and these people, their passports were confiscated, and they were made to work 18 hours a day. If you can imagine that a billionaire family, one of the richest families on the planet, can have slave labor, you can imagine what happens in the rest of India, among the middle class, among the lower middle class, and even among the higher class in India. They are extraordinarily exploitative. Sexual exploitation of maids is nothing new, nothing big. In fact, I would mostly condone it given the circumstances of India. Sodomizing children is nothing new, nothing crazy. So yes, again, as we talked initially, the first world people who all see this compassion and happiness among the third world people don't even never come across bacha baji, sodomy of children or rape of maids. So these maids are extraordinarily exploited. Now, you go to any women's meeting in India, anywhere in the country, the middle class women's meeting where they meet up for socialization, almost assuredly, they will be talking about how they maintain their maids. So that's how the exploitative environment of the country is. Everyone is trying to exploit everyone else. Children as young as 6 or 7 have to start working. Which is nothing, and I have nothing against it as such, but they get extremely exploited. They are beaten up and they are sexually exploited. They are psychologically and physically damaged in the process. Now, given that situation, given that background, and you have to understand that background before you start complaining about sweatshops, that sweatshops are a huge improvement because now productivity is higher, salaries are slightly higher. Maybe instead of getting paid $20 a month, you now get paid $80 a month, which means that your children might no longer need to work, and or might not have to do such hard labor anymore, which is psychologically and physically damaging to you. So sweatshops are a great improvement. Thanks for McDonald's, thanks for Pepsi, thanks for all the sweatshops. But again, exploitation always exists. That's the underpinning factor of the third world culture. A third world person is after resource acquisitions, has no moral values, has no rational values, and given a chance, he will cheat you, he will exploit you. Now, of course, I'm talking about the larger bell curve. I'm not talking about the tail end people, but this is the underpinning factor. So thank God to all these multinational companies who bring in, pay higher wages, and provide sweatshop conditions, which are a massive, massive improvement for most of those people in the third world.
I should have expected the curveball with the sweatshops question. So moving explicitly to India, which is obviously something we always need to talk about when I speak to Mr. Bhandari, I'm working on a course, Jayant, a digital privacy course, and one of the reasons for leaving Microsoft, as we teach how to do in the course, is they have always been, and they've become increasingly surveying of our activity. And there's a clip of the Microsoft CEO explaining how this new Windows 11 service is going to basically take screenshots of your computer every 5 seconds and use it essentially to optimize your archiving and search history and all the rest. And as this guy is explaining this thing straight out of a dystopian novel, he doesn't blink. He's not fazed. This seems obviously a good thing. Now, this Microsoft CEO is an Indian guy born in India. And we also have Indian CEOs at Google, OnlyFans, Microsoft, previously of Twitter, Adobe, Vimeo, VMware, IBM Micro. I'm wondering if you could explain a little bit what, if you notice in a company, whether or not this company has a CEO who is Indian, whether or not the culture, the Indian culture, can be seen in the actions of the leader of some of these big tech companies.
Very subliminally, very quietly, these people will convert the American culture and American institutions into third world institutions. And that is why, Gabriel, if people ever ask me if I would ever stand for elections in the Western society, I would say I wouldn't even vote for myself in the Western society. Because I come from a different culture, I have different instincts. My philosophical situation might be very similar or even more advanced than those of many Western people, but my instincts are different, Gabriel. And that is the reason why I have to be very careful that I don't provide negative value to the Western society. These Indian CEOs who are working in American companies, through their micro actions, these very, very small, subtle, unseen actions, will provide this termite-like action that will subvert the cultures of the first world countries. It is absolutely mind-boggling, Gabriel. You won't see it if you are from the first world. You will mostly ignore it because you will see those things as noise. But if you have done science or engineering, you understand that if noise is consistent or if it's systemic, there's something behind it, and then it adds up. And that leads to things like stepping in a certain rhythm on a bridge can lead to a collapse of a bridge. And something similar is what these Indian CEOs are participating in. They're stepping on these bridge in a way that goes unseen by the first world people because they only see noise there. But the fact is that they are stepping on it in a certain wavelength that will eventually result into the crashing of that bridge. These people will destroy your civilization. And that is why, Gabriel, I'll tell you, I actually like Vivek Ramaswamy quite a bit. I think if I had to decide between Biden and Vivek Ramaswamy, I would vote for Vivek Ramaswamy. But I will tell you that I would be extraordinarily careful before voting for an Indian, before voting for a guy from the third world country, because his instincts might be very damaging. His micro actions might be very damaging to your country. Now, finally, Gabriel, let me tell you this thing that I use India as the background quite often because if I use Nigeria or if I use Congo, people will always come back saying, "Hey, Jayant, you haven't really experienced Congo enough to say all that much about Congo." Now, I know what happens in Nigeria. I have traveled alone in Congo and in many other sub Saharan countries. And that the only reason I use India as the background is because I can get away with it. I have traveled extensively in India. I am an Indian. But what I say is primarily true for two-thirds of the world's population, which lives in the third world countries. And I have traveled across Latin American countries, and I have traveled across sub-Saharan Africa, and I've traveled to Laos, Myanmar, many other countries, and I see exactly the same pattern. They have a third world mindset. I just use India because people don't start objecting to what I have to say because they know I understand India very well. But again, even the very best from these countries are the people who can create in leadership position a hugely damaging effect to your institutions in the West. So I would be very horrified. I'm horrified. I would be scared about having these Indian CEOs, and they obviously do things which, in my eyes, are damaging the Western society.
You sent me a video of a philosopher explaining language in Africa and how, if you notice certain concepts missing from a language, it kind of can explain certain things about the culture. And I wonder if you could tell the audience a little bit about Hindi and if you notice or can detect anything about Indian culture from its language.
Yes, Gabriel. Now remember, India has been influenced by Europeans and Arabs for almost 2 millennia, something that did not happen in sub Saharan Africa. So you can think of sub Saharan Africa as a base case, whereas India has been influenced by outsiders for 2 millennia. But again, the underpinning thinking, the underpinning culture, the underpinning values have stayed the same because they take much more than a couple of millennia to change. So, what you have in India is a language which has got grammar from what is called Indo European languages. So, there is grammar, but there are something very funny about Indian language, particularly Hindi. Firstly, Hindi is not an Indian language. It is my mother tongue, it's the national language of India. But surprisingly, it is not even an Indian language. It is a concoction by the British. British realized that these were all these tribal areas using very different languages, and they had to bring all these people together to be able to enable these people to communicate and transact with each other. So the British created what is known as Hindi. Now, most people have forgotten about it. Most people will not even believe it when I say this. But there's another thing. The word Hindu there's nothing like Hindu religion. It was concocted by the British just over a century back because they wanted to formalize the chaos of religious and pagan chaos that they saw in India. But again, as I talked in the past with you, Gabriel, creating a structure on what is fundamentally a chaos does not remove the underpinning chaos. You actually misinform your audience about the underpinning chaos because the underpinning chaos is the main value of that system, which is that it's a non-system. Now, there's a word called word for yesterday and word for tomorrow in Hindi. Both words are the same. Kal. Kal means yesterday, kal means tomorrow. Wonder why it's the same word to talk about yesterday and the same word to talk about tomorrow. Is there something happening in the Indian mind? Now, I'm not sure, Gabriel. I went to a Catholic school. I grew up in a business family, but I have seen people around me, and I'm talking about let's say 98 to 99.8% of the population of India, who have no concept of time. You ask them to do something, they might promise you that they would come and meet you at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. They might not come for a week. And they will very likely not come for a week, actually. So they lack the concept of time, and this is something that everyone today must have experienced about Africans and about people of South Asia. They simply cannot imbibe the concept of time. Now, they know the word time. You can explain it to them, you can take them through it, but they don't have this emotional feel for it. Now, Gabriel, I was late today in starting this conversation with you, and I wrote you an email saying, hey, I'm going to be a few minutes late. You will never, ever get that from these 99.99% Indians, because they don't have the concept of time. Similarly, dictionaries really did not exist in these countries. British brought in the concept of dictionaries. Most of the words that have any association with philosophy or ideas were concocted by the British for the Hindi speaking population. Indians, the Hindi speaking population, don't know 99% of those words because they don't discuss ideas. So they don't understand subjunctive tense, they don't understand ideas. And if I talk the way I'm talking with you right now, with close to 99.9999% Indians, they will start making fun of me. They will start saying, are you trying to become a saint? Are you trying to become a priest? Are you joking? Why are you so impractical in life? So they don't have the concept of ideas. And hence, Hindi is used for only one thing, which is to do a small talk, which is talk about daily affairs, talk about sex and money, and about gossiping to do with celebrities and politicians. That's all they do in life. You go to any Indian group of 5 people or 3 people, and this is all you will ever hear.
In another interview, I heard you say that Indians should basically immediately stop building bridges for the sake of saving Indian lives.
I am not flippant at all, Gabriel. This is very funny. When the British left India, they had constructed hundreds of bridges in the country. Apparently, they have an office in London is still keeping track of those bridges. And they inform the Indian government on a regular basis which bridge has run out of its life and which bridge now needs maintenance. And there have been cases in which they informed the Indian government, hey, this bridge has run out of its life or it needs maintenance. The government of India did not do anything, and that bridge started to fall apart after 100, 150, 200 years. So that's how crazy the situation is. The Indian government itself does not do what it should be doing, and a country that left India 76 years back, sitting in London, is keeping track of those things. That is how dysfunctional India is. Anything complex simply does not work in that country. So imagine that even though the bridges were constructed by the British, Indians cannot maintain those bridges, and they cannot keep track of what needs to be done when. But this is not just about India. And, really, I should start talking about other countries as well. In South Africa was a first world country, but a time came when it became a proper democracy. It brought in psychopaths into power who cannot imagine tomorrow. And I'm not exaggerating here. I literally mean they cannot imagine tomorrow. That means that they don't have the concept of maintenance, which meant that they can't do any planning for the future. And this is the same in India. They don't do any planning. They can't do any maintenance. If they have to rape you today, even knowing that their bones might get broken tomorrow, they would still rape you today. because tomorrow does not exist in their imagery. I'm not just talking about vocabulary, it does not exist in their imagery. So they will rape you today. They don't have impulse control as a result because they can't think about tomorrow. So now thinking about complex things require abstract thinking. You have to think in your mind how those cogs would come together in that machine to work in sync do to meet a particular objective. Because these people can't do those things, everything complex turns out to have problems. Nothing works there. But in fact, I actually sometimes think that India should stop building even simple roads. They should just leave those as dirt roads. And in fact, that is what you see in most of sub-Saharan Africa. They are just dirt roads because Indians cannot maintain those proper roads either. Those proper roads get potholes. And remember, dirt roads don't get as bad potholes because the curvature of the potholes in dirt roads are more smooth than the potholes of the tar road, which can be very dangerous for vehicles. So everything complex becomes a problem, either because of corruption or whatever you think of, but nothing complex ever works in that society. And if you understand what I'm saying, Gabriel, India is headed for a Taliban kind of system eventually, because they, even a complex society like India is far too complex for them. It simply does not work. Today, as I speak, New Delhi is dying of a thirst. There's lack of water in New Delhi. The next door state, Haryana, is brimming with water in its dams, but it will not release that water in the dams, although that water is of no immediate use to Haryana, just because the politicians of the two states are from opposition parties. So they can't even work together for simple things like those. So nothing complex works in that country. But worse than that, Gabriel, you create all these complexities, massive dams, massive bridges, and they will fall apart and they will create an environmental crisis that these people are completely unprepared to deal with. Remember, there was a tunnel collapse in India just a few months back, and they had to bring in all kinds of people from Australia or elsewhere to help them out with that tunnel collapse. Now, Gabriel, I have been to tunnels 3 kilometers underground in mines, and they are, there's a technology. Those tunnels can be very dangerous. They are hot, humid. You have to be very careful in those tunnels, but there's a technology that takes care of safety concerns. But India could not really build that tunnel properly, and the tunnel collapsed, entrapping so many people, and they had to bring in outsiders. But funnily, because this collapsed and the videos were getting recorded of what was happening, all you saw was chaos around that tunnel. They were dumping all the material they were extracting from the tunnel just outside on the other side of the road to the tunnel, which is absolutely crazy because you are now creating a landslide risk for the lower part of the other side. But they don't think that way. The civil engineers are untrained. They are at best cogs in the machine. And they just have a certificate, an output of cargo cult mentality. They think certificate gives them knowledge and skills and power. They don't think that behind that certificate must be some learning and wisdom. So again, nothing complex works in that society. And very simply put, Gabriel, I like to say that any organization of two people in India has one person too many. That is how much you should decentralize that country. That is how tribal that society is. And that's why India's future is of a Taliban kind of society, which will actually be an improvement because a complex society simply cannot provide you justice. Actually, all institutions in India are predatory. You go to a police station, you will get sodomized and raped. You will get brutalized. You will be stolen from. by every single police station. And I hear that from my friends and people I know, even in cities in Bangalore, New Delhi, Calcutta, Mumbai, the big metropolitan cities. People get raped, sodomized, and cheated. You have to bribe every single person because you should not have created that complexity.
We can get off of India with a few rapid fire questions. Now, these have been vetted to guarantee be certainly answerable in a couple words or less. The Indian demonetization of the high rupee notes, that was a total fiasco a few years back. What percent did the Indian currency supply increase after that demonetization?
Oh, massively. I can't remember. I haven't seen the latest data, but I think it is now 100% or more higher than what it was when they demonetized.
How many Indians depend on the government for food?
60 to 80%.
What percent of Indians pay income tax?
Less than 1%, I think.
If you had to keep 100% of your wealth in 4 fiat currencies, which 4 would you pick?
I would pick Hong Kong dollars, Japanese currency, Chinese currency, and Singaporean currency.
Name a couple of your favorite historical leaders.
Lee Kuan Yew. Lee Kuan Yew by far was the best statesman of the last century.
After a bridge is built in India, how long do some Indians wait before they trust and use that bridge?
Several months.
If I'm not mistaken, you spent some time in Harare in Zimbabwe, and you ended up, I think, was it with Robert Mugabe or one of his relatives? I wonder if you could tell that story and what you extracted from that encounter.
Yes, I spent a couple of days with a nephew of Robert Mugabe. This was a very interesting experience. He thought that, and quite rightly, I was working for a fund manager those days, a big American company. So he took me as someone very influential. And he took me around the many places for those 2 days. He took me to his massive mansions within Harare and outside Harare. There were fleets of cars parked outside each house. There was photographs or paintings of a young girl in bikini or less than a bikini in the living areas of those mansions. And I'll come back to that in a moment. And he was driving like absolutely crazy within Harare and outside Harare. He never stopped for the police checkposts. He took me to the farms that had been expropriated from the white farmers. And let's go one by one on these things. The farms were all dead. Wheat was growing on those farms. They were completely empty. So they expropriated those farms for no good reason. Harare, Zimbabwe, the earlier Rhodesia, was the breadbasket of Africa at one point of time. Now it depends on food from other countries. He dodged those police checkposts because that is a show of power. If you are something important, you don't stop for normal police. And this is something very important as well, because you have to look important in these countries. Otherwise, they rape you and collect bribes from you and harass you. The young girl's photograph was his daughter. I was very surprised. Being a man, talking to a man, and at least this is 15 years back, I made some comment which I almost immediately regretted, because this was his daughter, but he did not find anything bad about it because that's what he wanted it for. It's like I feel amused when I feel whether I should be asking a person with tattoos all over all his body, but the fact is he has tattoos because he wants you to question those tattoos. And the same thing happened with this photograph. He wanted people to talk about them. But again, you also understand that you can give them a lot of prosperity and education, but if you don't give them civilization and culture, civilization comes from moral fabric, it comes from rational fabric. And if you cannot pre-install those two things before you give them prosperity and education, everything will have a perverse consequences. they won't get the concept of family unless you pre-install the moral and rational fabric in their minds. And because they didn't, he did, these so many of these people don't have it. They don't really look at their daughters as something to protect and preserve, or at least that's how I see it in my mind.
I heard a story of somebody also in Zimbabwe, and it may have been Mugabe himself. He would just fly past even all of the lights, the red lights, and if you didn't stop and get out of the way, you could actually be gunned down, which is pretty wild, but pretty expected based on what you've told us about how
these policemen, when this guy drove around, policemen had to step out. He drove so fast, he actually picked up his speed at the crossings. The policeman who was standing in the way had to step out, or they would have been crushed.
Moving to a different part of the world, Argentina having a flirtation with so-called anarcho-capitalism with Javier Milei. Looking kind of zooming out, where do you think Argentina will be 25 years from now?
Not necessarily in a very good shape, Gabriel. I have a very negative forecast prognosis for all the third world countries. Now, Argentina is not a third world country. It's the only exception in the Latin American countries, Uruguay and Argentina, actually. But because of the surroundings and the ecology, Argentina and Uruguay will get destroyed as well. Argentina is a lifestyle country. From what I see, it lacks the philosophical basis in that country. Argentina got the worst of Europeans. Now, I love Argentina because it's a fun place to go to. It's a fun place to be in because this is a lifestyle country. But without philosophical basis, everything will fall apart eventually. Milei, I think, is mostly a product of the fact that there was no other choice left for Argentinians rather than this happening because they had an awakening. But I will be very happy if I'm proven wrong.
Do you think something different or similar is happening in El Salvador with Bukele?
There is nothing different happening in El Salvador. I have read about it. I know people who are closer to that scene. Again, this is the problem with the media. It likes to use black and white filters to see everything. They see something, they perceive something as good, and they then extrapolate that a lot of other goods might be happening in that country. But just because El Salvador is now using Bitcoin, or it has allowed Bitcoin to be used as a currency, or has arrested a lot of people, it does not mean it's a systemic change in the country. You have to be extremely negative about El Salvador, Guatemala, Belize, Panama, Costa Rica. Most of these countries, Latin America will continue to fall apart because, Gabriel, Pax Americana is gone. Pax Americana kept these countries under check. People think it's the democratic movements of these countries which kept them at check. No, it was Pax Americana.
A little bit of a different question here. I read the other day that Japan let in a record amount of refugees in 2023, a total of 303 refugees. The US was projected something like 100,000. Do you think that Japan gets punished in international affairs for being such an anti-refugee, anti-immigration country?
Yes, Gabriel, it's very funny. Let's talk about something a bit extreme, which is China. And whenever I say anything nice about China, even to my friends who are very close to me, they start rolling their eyes because it just seems incomprehensible to them. And the reason is the propaganda that has been run by the Western media, which is very anti-East Asian countries. Now, East Asian countries are not perfect, but they have a lot of good values. A lot of those good values are either very similar to what are Western values, Western philosophical values, which might have been independently come up in those countries, but they are in sync with the Western values. Japan does not accept refugees, but even these 303 refugees that you talked about, they will never get Japanese passports. They might be allowed to live there for 3 or 4 generations, but they will very likely never get Japanese passports. Virtually all these 100,000 refugees you are talking about in America will end up getting American passports. So I actually like the concept of what Japan is doing. And there are issues with Japan, but for example, the population problem of Japan. But what America, Canada, and Australia are doing is not only not doing anything to sort that problems, because they are importing unproductive masses from the third world to imagine that they would somehow take care of you. But in the best of cases, they are kicking the can down the road rather than trying to understand how to deal with that problem. Japan, China, and Korea will deal with those problems through robotics eventually.
Yeah, and any kind of explicit examples of not sanctions against Japan, but kind of international bodies that are discriminating against Japan in some measurable way based on their viewpoint?
Well, it happens all the time. And this is what the United Nations, World Bank, and some of these big organizations do. But you have to understand, and Gabriel, I consult some of the very big companies, helping them guide through the processes in particularly in India. The fact remains that a lot of people, even if they are very nice-hearted and good-hearted, in the urban areas of the Western society, which is very comfortable, they don't really understand the complexities of the world. And this is the problem with urbanization and too much comfort. You wake up, you have electricity, you have water, you have coffee. The mind starts thinking that life is predictable. That leads to a simplistic understanding of how the universe works. So that's one thing. The second thing is, Gabriel, that people who are compassionate or have very high IQ, who are very intelligent, have a handicap, strangely and ironically, because compassionate people simply cannot understand the concept of evil. Because they don't have the concept of evil in their own minds. Unless you have those, you can't see it in other people. And that is why, again, Gabriel, used to be a certain kind of person, and I can, as a result, see some of those things in life, which a person who is very intelligent and very compassionate simply cannot see. Some of these people in big institutions in United Nations, World Bank might be very nice, but they are simplistic in their thinking. They can't understand the complexities of life, and they judge Japan and China the wrong way in many factors.
So I wonder if, as a kind of a final question here, I think some people might be surprised that they can still type in Jayant Bhandari on YouTube and you haven't been totally censored from the internet. Any update on cancel culture events in your life?
No, I was cancelled from one mining conference in Frankfurt about 2 years back. And since then, there has been no attempt or no successful attempt to cancel me. There are a lot of Indians who want to cancel me from social media, or they want to report me to the Indian government to stop me from entering the country. We will see when that happens, Gabriel. I will keep going to India. When they stop me, I will report it back to you. We will make it an international news. We will tell the world if they stop me from entering the country. But indeed, there are a lot of people who don't want me to enter the country. And this is the sorry thing about Indians. And if they are listening, the problem is that being a warrior means going out to fight. It does not mean reporting me to Elon Musk and to try to disable my account. That is not about being a warrior. That is actually a very spineless way to be a warrior, to think that you are a warrior.
Absolutely. Total cowardice on behalf of these people. So this has been Jayant Bhandari. If you like what you hear, I have 4 more conversations with him. which you can check out on Twitter. He's Jayant Bhandari 5, and he has a website where he collects all of his interviews. He's working on a book. We'll hear from that later on. I know he's in the middle of that based on my last conversation. I'll have all the links in the show notes. Mr. Bhandari, thank you for joining the show.
Thank you very much, Gabriel.